which says, but for all the shifts in our understanding of what development means, there is one paradigm that stubbornly persists. It is still about how we in the West can help the poor in other countries. What can we give you? What can we teach you? But are we right to be so confident of what we have to offer? I know a lot of Africans, Latin Americans and Asians who are appalled at how we live in Britain and who genuinely pity our way of life. And they don't just pity the poor, they pity society as a whole. They cannot fathom how we put our parents in old person's homes, so to sit in circles watching telly. They are sad that mental health is now a big concern, is as big a concern in our hospitals as physical injury. They find the number of abortions carried out each year abhorrent, just to name 3 examples. And so it's interesting to see the lens turned back on us and how people from other parts of the world might think that we have some sort of cultural poverty, perhaps, as a way of conceptualising it. There's also, we could also define poverty in different ways in terms of environmental poverty, lack of access to environmental services, or political poverty, lack of participation in sort of political decision making. But the one which we're most commonly, which we've heard about today from yourselves, is poverty of opportunities, and not having the ability or the access to follow the livelihoods or the futures that we want. And I think this is sort of the key one. If you can give people access to the opportunities they want, then they can make the decisions of what's important to them. So facilitating that is the challenge, I think. And so one thing that we have to be careful of as well, which is coming across in a lot of the development literature these days, is that we don't just focus on people's deficiencies or communities' deficiencies. When we think about poverty, we often think about what they lack and what's missing from their lives. And often we make a judgment of that based on our own conceptions. And while that's, to a degree, it's well meant and can be justified, it's also important that we don't miss these strengths that societies might have. So I'll come back to that as we go along. So the problem with poverty perhaps is that we only look at the negatives. It's really important we also look at the positives.
We have them 3 things on couch.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I've done this before.
That's right. I like being close to Kate.
Okay, so what is poverty is one question, but why do you think there is poverty then? Why is there a lack of opportunities for everyone? Why is there different levels of opportunities? I think everyone has a lack of opportunities in some senses, but we also make our own opportunities at different scales and different levels. But why do you think there's different access to opportunities around the world? What's some of the causes of poverty? This is obviously a key question to think about if you're going to be addressing these issues.
Some of the colonisation issues and the core periphery and how it's
like one of my students. Colonisation and core periphery relationships between the exploiters and the colonials.
Even distribution of the actual resources.
Yeah, it's an important one. Yeah. So some places have lots of natural resources. Sometimes it's a curse. There's a theory called the resource curse, where conflict seems to accompany places that are high in natural resources. But in general, if you do have natural resources and you manage them well, like in Brunei, for example, then that gives you a boost in terms of overcoming poverty. Any other ones?
That's the right word to use, but the restrictions around the spreading of ideas and technology, and I guess in a way there is like a scarcity, if you like, of knowledge, and the distribution of knowledge is that disseminated to the world.
Yeah, that's a really good one actually. Yeah. So
It also gives the elite an advantage in any place, because they have access to knowledge.
yeah.
Greater access to knowledge, they can use that to get what they want. And it enhances the unequal distribution of resources, whether it's natural or otherwise.
Yeah, so maybe it's a good way to think about knowledge is as a resource that can alleviate poverty in some ways, and it is unevenly distributed around the world, and within places there's huge differentiation between those who get high level education and those who get very low ones. And we can see that even in New Zealand. There's a lot of efforts to make education as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Anything else?
I think cultural narratives as well, like the story and the overall, the whole goal of a culture, where they're focused, what they're about, so to speak. So how we in the West can be very much individualistic, and that can be a goal that our stories point to, kind of can fuel a poverty or cultural poverty in a way.
Yeah, for sure. So poverty can be caused by our own cultures in some sense.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's a direct cause, but geography in terms of the lay of the land and how people interact with nature can create poverty downstream. So living in a place which is particularly exposed to storm or particularly exposed is low, especially if we don't have technology that will drain it or so on and so forth, can lead to poverty and death.
Yeah, so we have sort of environmental degradation or natural hazards and these sorts of things. It's a really important one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really crucial one. Market economies have been sold to us for many years as something that alleviates poverty, but in many cases you can see that actually contributes more to poverty in particular areas. If they don't have a natural resource or a knowledge resource or something to sell which is valued on the market, can lead to all sorts of problems. If you want to know more about that, you should all do development studies degrees and all about it. So for me, I think that poverty's mainly, the lack of opportunities is mainly caused by uneven development. So some places develop faster than others for these reasons we've been talking about, having access to knowledge or having access to natural resources or markets. These things lead to whole countries developing at different paces, but it also leads to particular areas within countries becoming wealthier or poorer. And we see quite often this divide between the urban and the rural. With the urban managing to attract most of the money and funding and best people and jobs, and the rural falling behind in many countries. And that can be, if you look purely at economic indicators, it can be by a degree of 10, for example, where you're 10 times likely to be wealthy, or you're likely to be 10 times as wealthy in the cities as you are in the rural areas. And so we have uneven development happening across Southeast Asia, across the whole world. Even in New Zealand, we can see uneven development occurring here. So again, we can share some of these things with people in other countries. I'm not going to go through all these, but very, very simply, we can look at sort of structures that exist within the world that lead to this uneven development. Whether we look at market-orientated approaches, where we can see that market failings in some places, where poverty has been caused by the shift to sort of capitalism and to neoliberal sort of philosophies. At the same time, we can see failings with some of the communist systems where state-directed development hasn't led to the poverty alleviation that was once envisioned and idealised within the communist system. So we can look at those sort of structural processes, and some of these are international structures. So if you're addressing the cause of poverty, how do you sort of beat capitalism, or how do you stop neoliberalism from spreading? It's a big task for a bunch of people like us to try and do. Other ones are sort of more based in country, and so we can see failings within political systems, in democracies, but also in military dictatorships. There can be a lack of access for people to actually influence decision makers' opinions.